60 to 90% of these cases of seasonal affective disorder occur in women. That's not really a huge surprise. I think the 90% is probably a little high. But I think, overall, women have a 2-to-1 incidence of depression over men anyway, twice as much. So, now, a couple things. One is the biology to think about. Okay, you know that our bodies kind of our brains have their own clock, and so they do have some regulation. I mean, we know that for a fact that they regulate the brain regulates itself through a day, to the 24-hour day. But it also has a little gland in the brain called the pineal gland. And you guys, have anybody ever heard of melatonin? Melatonin is, you can buy that over the counter and all this. Supposed to help with jet lag. I don't know how much. I've tried it. It didn't seem to help much. But melatonin is actually a hormone in its pineal gland. It secretes melatonin. And when it gets dark, the melatonin goes up and you get sleepy. And then when it gets light, it suppresses the melatonin. So that may be there may be some biology somehow that may be linked with some of this, well, certainly with our difficulty getting up when it's dark on the winter mornings. Our body has a built-in. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that our body or our brain has a built-in regulator that tells us when we're supposed to be awake and when we're supposed to be asleep. And we're not normally nocturnal creatures, and so when we try to wake up, when we try to work night shifts, let's say, or we try to wake up at 6 o'clock on a cold winter morning, our body's fighting us. It's telling us, hey, you don't need to be doing that. So some people, the other thing I'm trying to get to is that I think some people's brains may be more sensitive to the seasonal changes like that, and so they may end up with full-blown depressive episodes. So back to one last thing about the treatment. I mentioned in this case that the person tried an antidepressant and they got worse. Well, that can definitely happen. It doesn't happen in every case. But some people who have more cyclical depressions, depression that occurs, every 2 years or every year, around the same time or something. Those cyclical depressive folks, when you use an antidepressant, they sometimes don't do as well. They may come out of the depression temporarily, but then overall what happens is they end up getting more cycles of moods. So these folks may end up getting more depressed now in the summer. It's starting to bleed over into the summer. So the antidepressant is worth a shot, but it's something to consider that, if you're going to use it, probably what you ought to do, or you ought to have your family member do, is chart their moods so that if they're going to get worse, they're going to see it. Because moods can change kind of subtly, and it's hard to know unless you're really writing it down at the end of every day. The other interesting thing is that, has anybody ever heard of light therapy? I mean, light therapy has been studied and shown to be helpful for folks with seasonal affective disorder. What light therapy is basically it's a light that mimics the sunlight. Doesn't have the harmful UV in it, but it's a broad spectrum light, and it's in a box, And the idea is that you sit in front of this light, and you don't have to just stare at the light. You don't necessarily need to burn your eyes or anything. But you sit there and you read in front of this light for an hour and a half to 2 hours a day, and that sort of I guess it must reset somehow your melatonin or something. It somehow treats the seasonal affective disorder. I remember in residency they were selling, somebody had come up with the invention of a ball cap, like a baseball cap, with a little light in it. So people walk around, and the trouble is the batteries don't last very long, and so, but imagine they spend a fortune on batteries walking around every day for 2 hours with a bright light shining in their face. But that's one way, that's one interesting kind of novel way, for folks, especially for folks who aren't too interested in medication. If you not want to take medication, that's one thing to try. If you are going to take medication, one of the things you'd consider with this is a mood stabilizing medicine. And it's interesting, you might say, well, that's for bipolar disorder, doc. But again, this may be some variant of that. These aren't folks that necessarily get manic or hypomanic every spring, but their mood does improve in the spring. And because they have sort of a cycle of their depression, this mood stabilizing medicine may smooth that out. So it's something to consider. And in this case, the case that I gave you, this person went to see a psychiatrist. And since it was a cyclical depression, like I mentioned, and may be worsened by antidepressants, a mood stabilizer was chosen. The patient ended up taking the mood stabilizer all year long, but it helped stabilize the moods all through the year. So she didn't have too much depression in the fall and the winter. The idea there would be to stay. You'd probably want to stay on that, especially if you've had 5 years in a row of having trouble like that. You know, if you go for a year without it, you probably want to stay on that to keep you from having that again. Now that's different for everybody, and it also depends on how well you're tolerating the medicine. If you don't like the medicine, if you're having side effects or something like that, then it might be worth, after a year or so coming off of it and seeing how you do. But if you get depressed again, remember what I said a long time ago with depression. You get depressed once, and you get treatment, and you get better, probably good to stay on that medicine for at least a year. If you get depressed again, that's the second time, you need to stay on for at least 2 years. If you get depressed 3 times, the chances of you getting depressed again, 90% or more. So probably, I wouldn't take those odds. So I would recommend to the person that they need to stay on medicine from that point on. And it would be the same thing with this, this seasonal affective disorder. So question, anybody ever heard of this disorder before or read about it? I think it gets a lot of press. I think people talk about it a lot, especially here in the northern climate. So any questions? Yeah?
When people do decide to use that light,
yeah.
Do they use it every day at the same time and for the same length of time?
Usually that's the best advice. The question, and I'm going to repeat the question for the camera here, but the question is when you use the light, do you use it for the same period of time, same amount of time, and the same time of day every day? And the answer is yeah, you need to use it every day. It should be, usually it's first thing in the morning, although I've heard people experimenting with nighttime at different times. I'm not really an expert on that, but I would say that to me it makes the most sense to use it at first thing in the morning. You get up, and that sort of helps you get through the darkness of the morning, and you read for an hour and a half, 2 hours in front of that light, or you can eat breakfast in front of whatever you do. It's a little inconvenient because those 2 hours you've got to find something to do in front of that light. Let's say you're somebody who likes to watch some TV, and you don't have to be right at work right away or something like that. You can have it sitting next to you while you're watching TV. So it doesn't have to be direct. It can be indirect light. It just has to get to your retina basically. Does that answer the question?
Yes, but I'm the opposite. I'm a happy morning person, and I'm that way all day. But I know someone who I think is like this.
Okay. And so the question, about the time of day. This is about the time of day, or the question? How do you convince someone to look into this, or that they might need to look into this? That's a good question. I've had that question a lot. So it's basically if you have a loved one that you're concerned has depression, and really this could be any kind of depression, really. It doesn't have to be seasonal, but any kind of mental illness, I suppose, anything that's affecting their brain. Because our society stigmatizes this stuff because they don't understand it, and that's the reason for the talks. Anything we don't understand, we sort of stigmatize, and so people, I think, are kind of scared to admit that they have something like this, or to even consider the idea that there's something going on like that. If it's interfering with their function, my advice is, if you have a loved one, is you start talking about it. You say, hey, Sally or whoever, I just have kind of, I love you. I love you an awful lot. Maybe start with something positive like that. And then go into what you noticed. It seems like lately you just haven't been really in very good spirits. You've been kind of negative about things, and whenever we talk, it seems like you're kind of negative. And I'm not picking on you or anything. I still want to be your friend, or all this, but I wondered if maybe you ought to look into that a little bit. And here, I looked on the internet or went to the library, and I pulled up some stuff on depression. And, it looks to me like you might have all these symptoms. Maybe you ought to go see Dr. So-and-so or something like that. That's kind of how I'd handle it. Now, you're going to get different responses. So some people are going to say, well, that's not a bad idea. I guess it does look sort of like I might have that. And I've noticed that. Some people are going to be very receptive, in other words, and other people are going to say, "What? Are you calling me crazy? What's the matter with you?" You know, you're going to get all those different kinds of response. And if they do that, I mean, at that point, you're basically done. You have to just say, "No, I'm not calling you crazy. I just thought maybe that maybe it might help you to see somebody." And then drop it. You know, they may get upset and still rant and rave about it and all that, but just drop it and maybe talk to some other person about it and see if they can approach them so that they get another person's opinion. You know, pastor or somebody else. So the more people